The blood-soaked sunset painted the horizon crimson as Jackson Irwin dragged himself through the dust of Wilson, Wyoming. His body riddled with pain, and his conscience heavy with the weight of 5 men dead by his hand. Not by choice, never by choice, but by necessity, when Harlan Blackstone's gang had ambushed him outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. It was 1876, and in this corner of the frontier, justice often came from the barrel of a gun. Jackson's vision blurred as he stumbled up the steps of Doc Wilkins' office, collapsing against the doorframe, one hand pressed to the bleeding wound in his side while the other weakly knocked against the weathered wood. His knuckles left streaks of red, bright against the pale paint. Good Lord! The door swung open to reveal a woman with chestnut hair pinned back in a practical bun, her green eyes widening at the sight of him. "Doctor, we've got a wounded man." Jackson tried to focus on her face, but darkness was creeping in from the edges of his vision. "Blackstone's men," he managed to rasp. "They won't be coming after me." "Because you killed them all?" she asked, her voice neither judgmental nor approving as she helped him inside. "Because they're dead," he corrected, before his legs gave out completely. He awoke to the gentle pressure of cool hands against his forehead and the scent of lavender. For a moment, he thought he might have died and gone to heaven, but the searing pain in his side confirmed he remained firmly in the land of the living. "You're awake." The same woman from before stood over him, replacing a damp cloth on his brow. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever open those eyes again." Jackson attempted to sit up, then hissed in pain and fell back against the pillow. "How long?" "3 days," she replied, adjusting his bandages with practiced efficiency. "You lost a lot of blood. The bullet missed your vital organs, but the infection nearly took you anyway." He studied her as she worked, her movements precise, her expression concentrated. She wasn't like the painted ladies at the saloon or the weathered farm wives he occasionally encountered. There was something refined about her, despite the simple blue dress she wore. "You got a name, madam?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Diana Lockhart," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm Doc Wilkins' nurse, and you're Jackson Irwin, according to the letter we found in your pocket." "Most folks call me Jack." "Most folks aren't putting your insides back together, Mr. Irwin," she countered with unexpected spirit. "I believe that earns me the right to call you what I please." Despite the pain, he found himself smiling. "I reckon it does at that." "The sheriff's been by twice," Diana continued, her tone growing more serious. "He'll want to speak with you about what happened." Jackson's smile faded. "It was self-defense. Blackstone's been gunning for me since I testified against his brother last spring." "So you killed 5 men, all by yourself?" Her words carried no accusation, just a quiet assessment. "I didn't have a choice." He looked away, staring at the worn floorboards beside the bed. "I was alone." Diana paused in her work, her eyes softening as she regarded him. "Then you'll never be alone again," she said softly, with such certainty that Jackson found himself wanting to believe her. "You don't know me, Miss Lockhart." "I know enough," she replied simply. "I know you've been calling out in your fever dreams, apologizing to people who aren't here. Good men don't do that unless they carry regret for the lives they've taken, even in self-defense." Before Jackson could respond, the door opened and Sheriff Brooks entered, his weathered face grim beneath his silver-streaked mustache. "Glad to see you're still among the living, Irwin," the lawman said, removing his hat. "Town's been buzzing about what happened at Cottonwood Creek. 5 men dead, and you the only one walking away or crawling, as the case may be." "They ambushed me," Jackson explained, wincing as he shifted to face the sheriff more directly. "Blackstone made it clear they weren't planning to take me alive." Sheriff Brooks nodded slowly. "That matches what we found. Bushwhackers positioned behind the rocks, multiple guns drawn. Still, it's a hell of a thing, one man coming out alive against those odds. I got lucky. Skill had more to do with it than luck, I'd wager. The sheriff glanced at Diana. How long before he's fit to travel, Miss Lockhart? Diana straightened, her chin lifting slightly. At least 2 more weeks, Sheriff. The wound needs to heal properly, or he risks tearing it open and bleeding out. Well, you're cleared of any wrongdoing, Irwin, Brooks said, settling his hat back on his head. But Harlan Blackstone will be none too happy when he hears you've killed 5 of his men, including his nephew. You might want to consider moving on once you're healed up. After the sheriff left, a heavy silence fell over the room. Jackson stared at the ceiling, contemplating the truth of Brooks' warning. He'd have to move on. Again. It was the story of his life since the war, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. You should rest, Diana said finally, gathering her supplies. Doctor will be in to check on you this evening. Miss Lockhart, he called as she reached the door. When she turned, he found himself momentarily lost in those clear green eyes. Thank you for saving my life. A small smile curved her lips. That's what I do, Mr. Irwin. I save lives to balance out all those determined to take them. The first week of recovery passed slowly for Jackson. Confined to bed, with only brief periods of assisted walking to prevent stiffness, he found himself craving Diana's visits more than he cared to admit. She came 3 times daily to change his bandages, bring him meals, and sometimes simply to read to him from one of her books. He learned she was 26, 5 years his junior, and had come west from Boston 2 years earlier after losing both parents to influenza. Her father had been a physician, and she had learned nursing at his side before formal training in a Boston hospital. Why Wilson? He asked one afternoon as she checked his wound, which was healing cleanly. Seems an unlikely place for a Boston lady to settle. My aunt married Doc Wilkins 20 years ago, Diana explained, applying a fresh bandage. When my parents died, she suggested I might find purpose here. The West needs healers more than Boston does. And have you found purpose? She considered the question, her hands stilling momentarily. Most days, though I confess there are times I miss the order of city life, the symphony libraries. She shook her head with a self-deprecating smile. Silly things that don't matter much when someone's bleeding out before you. They're not silly, Jackson said. Beautiful things matter, especially out here. Diana studied him with new interest. You surprise me, Mr. Irwin. You don't speak like most cowboys I've encountered. I wasn't always a cowboy, he admitted. I was a student once before the war changed everything. The war between the states, he nodded. I was studying literature at a small college in Pennsylvania. Enlisted in '63, came home in '65 with nightmares and a talent for violence I never wanted. Yet you ended up in Wyoming, working cattle and getting into gunfights. Jackson smiled ruefully. The books didn't seem to have the right answers anymore. Out here, at least the rules are simple. Work hard, keep your word, defend yourself when necessary. And wander from town to town, never setting down roots, Diana asked perceptively, something like that. What about family? Is there no one waiting for you somewhere? Jackson shook his head. Parents gone, no siblings. Had a fiancée once, but she married someone else while I was away fighting. Can't blame her, the man I was before never came home. Diana's expression softened with unexpected compassion. Perhaps he's still in there beneath the scar tissue. Maybe, Jackson conceded, though he didn't believe it. What about you? No suitors lining up for the doctor's beautiful niece. A flush colored her cheeks at the compliment. There have been offers, none that interested me particularly. Hard to imagine any man in Wilson being worthy of you, he said, the words escaping before he could consider their implications. Diana's blush deepened as she busied herself gathering her supplies. "You should rest, Mr. Irwin. Doctor says you can try standing without assistance tomorrow if your fever doesn't return." After she left, Jackson stared at the door for a long while, wondering what had possessed him to speak so boldly. Diana Lockhart was everything he wasn't: educated, refined, rooted in purpose. She deserved far better than a drifting gunslinger with blood on his hands and nightmares in his head. Yet for the first time in years, he found himself wishing he were a different sort of man. By the beginning of the second week, Jackson was able to walk the length of the hallway unassisted, though the effort left him winded. Dr. Wilkins, a gruff but kindly man in his 60s, pronounced his recovery remarkable for a man who'd lost half his blood, and credited Diana's vigilant care. "That niece of mine," the doctor said, adjusting his spectacles as he examined Jackson's wound, "has a gift for healing that surpasses even her father's. Could have had her pick of positions in Boston, but she chose to come here instead. Town's blessed to have her." "Yes, sir, it is," Jackson agreed sincerely. That afternoon, Diana brought him fresh clothes, a new shirt and trousers purchased from the general store with money from his own wallet. "I took the liberty," she explained, setting them on the chair beside his bed. "Your old ones were beyond saving." "I'm obliged to you," Jackson said. "Though I should warn you, I'm not a wealthy man. My funds are limited." Diana waved away his concern. "Dr. Wilkins doesn't charge men who have been shot as a general principle. He says it's bad enough to be shot without having to pay for the privilege of recovery." Jackson chuckled, then winced as the movement pulled at his healing wound. "Your uncle sounds like a wise man." "He is," Diana agreed, her expression growing more serious. "He's also worried about you, Mr. Irwin. We both heard what Sheriff Brooks said about Harlan Blackstone. It's nothing you need concern yourself with." "Isn't it?" Diana challenged. "You're my patient. Your welfare is very much my concern." Jackson sighed, running a hand through his overgrown hair. "Blackstone's reach extends through most of the territory. Once I'm healed, I'll head north, maybe into Montana." "Running again," she observed quietly. "Staying alive," he corrected. Diana sat on the edge of the chair, smoothing her skirts in a gesture he'd come to recognize as a sign she was gathering her thoughts. "There's another option," she said finally. "Dr. Wilkins owns property outside town, a small cattle operation run by a foreman. They lost a man last month to pneumonia and haven't replaced him. The work wouldn't be too strenuous while you finish healing, and it's far enough from town that Blackstone's men wouldn't likely stumble across you." Jackson stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You're offering me work." "Doctor is," she clarified, though her cheeks colored slightly. "At my suggestion." "Why would you do that for me?" Diana met his gaze directly. "Because everyone deserves a chance to stop running, Mr. Irwin, even men who have survived gunfights alone." For the first time in years, Jackson felt something crack open inside him, a small fissure in the protective shell he'd built around his heart. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she replied simply. "At least until you're fully healed. After that, well, the choice will be yours." "Yes," he said, surprising himself with how easily the decision came. "Thank you." Diana smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her already lovely face into something radiant. "Good, I'll tell Doctor. You can move out to the Willow Creek property next week, assuming your recovery continues apace." As she turned to leave, Jackson called after her. "Miss Lockhart." She paused at the door, looking back at him expectantly. "I think it's time you called me Jack." Her smile widened. "Very well, Jack, and I suppose under the circumstances you may call me Diana." "Diana," he repeated, savoring the name. "It suits you. goddess of the hunt and healing. Her eyes widened slightly. You remember your mythology. Some things stick even after all these years. Diana nodded, a new respect evident in her expression. Rest well, Jack. Tomorrow we'll try walking outside in the garden. After she left, Jackson lay back against his pillows, his mind racing. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was considering staying put. Not just for weeks or months, but perhaps longer. The thought should have terrified him, yet instead he felt a curious lightness, as if some burden he'd carried for years had begun to lift. The next day dawned clear and warm for early autumn. Diana helped Jackson into the small garden behind the doctor's house and office, her hand steady on his elbow as he navigated the 3 steps down from the back door. Careful now, she cautioned. We don't want you undoing all our hard work. The garden was modest but well tended, with late roses still blooming alongside herbs and medicinal plants. A wooden bench sat beneath an apple tree laden with ripe fruit, and Diana guided him toward it. This is my favorite spot, she confided as they sat. In the spring, the blossoms fill the air with the most wonderful scent, and in summer the shade is perfect for reading. Jackson breathed deeply, savoring the fresh air after weeks confined indoors. It's peaceful. You've made a real home here. I've tried, Diana agreed. Though sometimes I still feel like a visitor. The West is different from what I expected. How so? She considered the question, her hands folded neatly in her lap. It's both harsher and more beautiful than I imagined. The people are more complex. In Boston, everyone fits neatly into their assigned place in society. Here, a man can be a cattle baron or a desperado or anything in between, depending on the choices he makes. And the circumstances that force those choices, Jackson added. Diana nodded. Yes. I've learned not to judge too quickly. She glanced at him. Take yourself, for instance. At first glance, a dangerous gunslinger with blood on his hands. Yet beneath that, a man who can quote mythology and who apologizes in his sleep for lives he's taken in self-defense. Jackson looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. You give me too much credit. I don't think so, Diana said quietly. I've been caring for the sick and injured for 8 years now, Jack. I've learned to see people clearly, even when they try to hide. Before he could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Wilkins, who joined them in the garden with a pleased expression. Good to see you up and about, young man, the doctor said jovially. Diana tells me you're considering my offer at Willow Creek. Yes, sir, Jackson confirmed. It's a generous opportunity. Nonsense. Good hands are hard to find, and Tom Jenkins, that's my foreman, says you've got the look of a man who knows his way around cattle. I've worked my share of spreads, Jackson acknowledged. Though I should warn you, trouble has a way of finding me. Dr. Wilkins waved this off. Trouble finds everyone eventually, son. Question is what you do when it arrives. He fixed Jackson with a shrewd look. Diana seems to think you're worth taking a chance on, and she's a better judge of character than most. Jackson glanced at Diana, who was studying a nearby rose bush with sudden interest, though he could see her cheeks had colored slightly. I'll do my best not to disappoint her, sir, he said sincerely. See that you don't, Dr. Wilkins replied, his tone light but his eyes serious. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mrs. Peterson's youngest has the croup again, and I promised to stop by this morning. After the doctor left, a comfortable silence fell between them. Jackson found himself studying Diana's profile as she gazed out across the garden, noting the delicate curve of her jaw, the way the sunlight caught in her chestnut hair. You didn't have to speak for me, he said finally. With your uncle. Diana turned to him with a small smile. I merely told him the truth as I see it. And how do you see me, Diana Lockhart? The directness of his question seemed to catch her off guard. She hesitated, then answered with equal frankness. "I see a good man carrying more guilt than belongs to him, looking for a place to set down that burden." Her words struck him like a physical blow, seeing through his defenses to the core of what he'd been running from all these years. Not just Blackstone and others like him, but the weight of his own past. "What if I don't know how to set it down?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Diana's hand moved to cover his where it rested on the bench between them. "Then perhaps you need someone to help you." The warmth of her touch traveled up his arm and settled somewhere in the vicinity of his heart. For the first time in years, Jackson Irwin felt the stirring of something he'd thought long dead hope. A week later, Jackson moved to the Willow Creek property, a modest spread about 5 miles outside Wilson. The main house was occupied by Tom Jenkins and his wife Martha, while Jackson was given a small but comfortable cabin nearby that had previously belonged to the ranch hand who died. The work was hard but satisfying, and Jackson found his strength returning more rapidly as he settled into the rhythm of ranch life. Tom Jenkins was a fair-minded foreman who didn't ask questions about Jackson's past, and Martha's cooking alone was worth the long days of physical labor. Diana rode out twice a week to check on his wound and bring supplies from town. These visits quickly became the highlight of Jackson's existence, and he found himself watching the road on the days she was expected, eager for the first glimpse of her riding the doctor's gentle bay mare. "You're healing well," she pronounced one afternoon in late October as she examined the pink scar on his side. "Another few weeks and you'd hardly know you'd been shot." "Except for the nightmares," Jackson said without thinking. Diana's hands stilled. "Are they still bad?" He shrugged, pulling his shirt back down. "Some nights are better than others." "What helps, honestly, exhaustion," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Working from sunup to sundown doesn't leave much energy for dreaming." Diana frowned slightly. "That's not a solution, Jack. It's avoidance." "It works well enough." "Until it doesn't," she countered. "My father treated many soldiers after the war. The memories don't simply disappear because you're too tired to face them." Jackson sighed, leaning back in his chair. They were sitting in his small cabin, the afternoon sun streaming through the single window. "What would you have me do, then? Talk about it. Some things are better left buried." "Are they? You call out in your sleep, apologizing to men whose names I don't know. You survived that gunfight alone, but you're still fighting battles in your mind." "Some battles can't be won," he said quietly. Diana leaned forward, her expression intent. "But they can be survived, Jack. You're proof of that." Something in her earnest gaze broke through his defenses. "His name was Ali," Jackson said abruptly. "My best friend since childhood. We enlisted together, promised to look out for each other. At Cold Harbor, he took a bullet meant for me." The words came haltingly at first, then in a rush. "He died in my arms, Diana, and I lived. Just like with Blackstone's men, I always survive while others die around me." "And you think that's your fault?" she asked gently. "Isn't it? What makes my life worth more than theirs?" "Nothing," Diana said simply. "And everything. Life isn't measured in those terms, Jack." Ali made a choice to save someone he loved. That was his right. "And what about Blackstone's men?" Jackson challenged. "They didn't choose to die." "They chose to ambush you," she reminded him. "They chose violence, knowing the potential consequences." Jackson shook his head. "It's not that simple." "No, it isn't," Diana agreed. "Nothing important ever is. But carrying guilt for surviving doesn't honor those who died. Living well does." Her words resonated somewhere deep inside him, touching a truth he'd been avoiding for years. "I don't know if I remember how to live well," he confessed. Diana's smile was gentle. "Then perhaps it's time you learned again." Before she left that day, she handed him a small leather-bound book. It helped me after my parents died, she explained. Maybe it will help you too. Later, Jackson opened the book to find it was a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman. Inside the front cover, Diana had inscribed, "For Jack, remember that healing happens one day at a time. D.L." He read long into the night by lamplight, finding unexpected comfort in Whitman's verses about life, death, and the resilience of the human spirit. As autumn deepened toward winter, Jackson settled more comfortably into life at Willow Creek. The nightmares didn't disappear, but they came less frequently, and when they did, he found himself able to face them more squarely, remembering Diana's words about honoring the dead by living well. Diana's visits continued, though increasingly they had little to do with checking his wound, which had healed cleanly. Instead, they would talk for hours about books, about her life in Boston and his before the war, about their hopes and disappointments. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence on the porch of his cabin, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains. Tom Jenkins observed these visits with knowing eyes, but said nothing beyond an occasional knowing smile when Jackson found reasons to clean up and shave on the days Diana was expected. Martha was less subtle. "That girl's sweet on you, you know," she told Jackson matter-of-factly one evening as he helped her clear the supper dishes. "And unless I miss my guess, the feeling's mutual." Jackson nearly dropped the plate he was drying. "Miss Lockhart is just being kind. She's like that with all her patients." Martha's eyebrow rose skeptically. "Is that why she brings you books and spends half the day here every time she visits? Is that why she blushes like a schoolgirl whenever your name comes up in town? She talks about me in town." Jackson couldn't help asking, then immediately regretted it when Martha's expression turned triumphant. "I thought so," the older woman said with satisfaction. "You'd be a fool to let her slip away, Jack Irwin. Women like Diana Lockhart don't come along every day, especially not out here." Jackson sighed, setting down the dish towel. "It's not that simple, Martha, I'm not. I don't have anything to offer someone like her." "Hogwash," Martha retorted. "You've got plenty to offer: integrity, loyalty, a good heart for all you try to hide it. What more does a woman need? Security. A future. A man who doesn't have enemies looking to kill him." Martha waved this off. "Life's uncertain for everyone, especially out here. Diana knows that better than most. She's patched up enough bullet holes and birthed enough babies to understand how fragile life can be. That's all the more reason to grab happiness while you can." Her words stayed with Jackson long after he'd retired to his cabin that night. Could Martha be right? Was it possible Diana felt something beyond professional concern or friendly interest? And even if she did, would it be fair to act on it, knowing the dangers that followed him? He had no answers, but for the first time in years, he found himself wanting something more than mere survival. Winter arrived with a vengeance in late November, blanketing Willow Creek in snow and limiting travel to and from town. Diana's visits became less frequent, and Jackson found himself counting the days between them, an ache building in his chest that had nothing to do with his healed bullet wound. When she did come, bundled against the cold with her cheeks flushed from the biting wind, he had to resist the urge to pull her into his arms, to warm her with his body and confess the feelings that grew stronger with each passing day. Instead, he built up the fire in his cabin and offered her hot coffee, listening eagerly as she shared news from town and updates about her work with Dr. Wilkins. "We've had 3 cases of pneumonia already," she told him one bitterly cold afternoon in early December. "And Mrs. Simmons had her baby, a healthy boy, thank goodness. 8 pounds even." Jackson smiled, enjoying the animation in her face as she spoke of her work. "You love it, don't you? Healing people." Diana nodded, cradling her coffee cup between her gloved hands. There's nothing quite like it. Especially delivering babies, being present for someone's first moments in the world. She hesitated, then added more softly, though it can be lonely sometimes. Lonely, but you're surrounded by people all day. Patience, Diana clarified. It's not the same as. She trailed off, staring into her cup. As what? Jackson prompted gently. As having someone who sees you, she finished, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. Not as a nurse or a healer or Dr. Wilkins' niece, just as yourself. The vulnerability in her words struck a chord in Jackson's heart. I see you, Diana, he said quietly. I always have. She looked up then, her green eyes meeting his with an intensity that took his breath away. Do you? Because sometimes I think you're still looking at me as the woman who saved your life, not as who I might be to you now. Jackson set his cup down carefully, his heart hammering in his chest. And who might that be? Diana's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. That depends on what you want, Jack Irwin. What I want, he repeated slowly, moving to kneel before her chair. Diana, what I want is more than I have any right to ask for. Let me decide what you have the right to ask, she whispered, her eyes never leaving his. With a courage that surpassed anything he'd needed on the battlefield or in gunfights, Jackson reached up to touch her cheek. I want you, he said simply. I want mornings and evenings and all the moments in between. I want to build something lasting if you'll have me. Even knowing what I am and what follows me. Diana covered his hand with hers, turning her face to press a kiss against his palm. I've known what follows you since the day you collapsed on our doorstep, Jack. It hasn't changed how I feel. And how is that? He asked, needing to hear the words. I love you, Diana said, her voice strong and certain despite the tears that shimmered in her eyes. I think I've loved you since I heard you apologizing in your fever dreams to men you had to kill. What kind of man does that except one with a conscience and a heart worth loving? Jackson pulled her into his arms then, no longer able to resist the need to hold her. I love you too, he murmured against her hair. More than I thought possible. But Diana, Blackstone is still out there. He won't rest until she silenced him with a finger against his lips. We'll face that together when the time comes. I didn't fall in love with a man who runs from his problems. No, Jackson agreed with a slow smile. You fell in love with a man who survives gunfights alone. Precisely. Diana's eyes sparkled with emotion. And I meant what I said that first day. You'll never be alone again, Jack. Not as long as I have breath in my body. When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Her lips were soft beneath his, yielding yet demanding in return, and Jackson knew with sudden certainty that he would do whatever it took to build a life with this remarkable woman. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Diana rested her forehead against his. What happens now? She asked. Now, Jackson said, I speak to your uncle and ask for his blessing. And then, if you're willing, I make an honest woman of you as soon as possible. Diana laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the small cabin. Doctor will pretend to be surprised, though I suspect he's been expecting this since he offered you the position at Willow Creek. Was I that transparent? We both were, Diana admitted, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Martha Jenkins told me weeks ago I wasn't fooling anyone with my medical visits. Jackson chuckled. Martha told me much the same thing. She said I'd be a fool to let you slip away. Martha Jenkins is a wise woman, Diana declared, her expression turning more serious. Jack, are you certain? Marriage to me means staying in Wilson, or at least nearby. No more drifting from town to town. I stopped wanting to drift the moment you told me I'd never be alone again, he said honestly. Blackstone or no Blackstone, my place is with you now. The kiss they shared then sealed a promise that neither took lightly. And when Diana finally departed for town that evening, it was with Jackson's mother's ring, a simple gold band he'd carried with him since leaving home, on her finger, and plans to speak with Dr. Wilkins the very next day. Dr. Wilkins received the news of their engagement with less surprise than Jackson had expected, though his penetrating gaze as he studied Jackson across his desk was intimidating nonetheless. "I won't pretend I haven't seen this coming," the older man said frankly. "Deanna's never been one to hide her feelings well, at least not from those who know her. The question is whether you're prepared for what marriage to my niece entails." "Sir," Jackson asked, uncertain of the doctor's meaning, "Diana isn't just any frontier girl, Irwin. She's educated, refined, accustomed to certain standards. She gave up a great deal to come west, but she did it out of duty and compassion, not necessity. Are you prepared to give her the life she deserves?" "I can't promise wealth," Jackson said honestly. "But I can promise to work hard, to be faithful, and to protect her with my life if necessary." Dr. Wilkins nodded slowly. "And what about Harlan Blackstone? Diana tells me you're concerned he may come looking for revenge." Jackson didn't bother denying it. "It's a possibility I have to consider. If you think it would be safer for Diana if I moved on, that's not what I'm suggesting," the doctor interrupted. "Diana has chosen you, and she's never been one to be dissuaded once her mind is made up." His expression softened slightly. "She's very like her mother that way." "What are you suggesting then, sir?" Dr. Wilkins leaned forward, his hands clasped on his desk. "I'm suggesting that a problem like Blackstone requires a permanent solution, not a lifetime of looking over your shoulder." Jackson stared at the older man, momentarily speechless. "Are you saying I should hunt him down?" "I'm saying that Wilson is our home," Dr. Wilkins replied steadily. "Diana's and mine, soon to be yours as well, and we protect what's ours in these parts." He reached into a drawer and withdrew a folded newspaper, sliding it across the desk. "This arrived on yesterday's stage from Cheyenne." Jackson unfolded the paper to find an article circled in ink. The headline read, "Notorious gang leader Harlan Blackstone indicted on multiple charges." "Federal marshals have been building a case against him for months," Dr. Wilkins explained. "Blackstone's in custody awaiting trial. With the evidence they've gathered and the witnesses lined up to testify, he's looking at a long stretch in federal prison, if not a date with the hangman." Relief washed over Jackson like a physical wave. "Then it's over." "The immediate threat, yes," the doctor agreed, "though men like Blackstone often have loyal followers willing to carry on their vendettas." "I'll remain vigilant," Jackson promised. "Deanna's safety will always be my first priority." Dr. Wilkins studied him for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw. "In that case, young man, you have my blessing, though I suspect you'd have married her with or without it." Jackson smiled. "I would have tried my damnedest to earn it first, sir," the doctor chuckled. "You already have, Irwin. You already have." They were married 2 weeks later in Wilson's small church, with snow falling gently outside and most of the town in attendance. Diana wore a dress of deep blue velvet that her aunt had altered from one of her own, with a wreath of winter berries in her hair instead of the traditional veil. Jackson, dressed in a new suit purchased for the occasion, felt his heart nearly stop when she appeared at the church door on Dr. Wilkins' arm. She was radiant, her smile brighter than any sunrise he'd ever witnessed, and when she joined him at the altar, he had to remind himself to breathe. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered as she took her place beside him. Diana's answering smile was for him alone. "And you, Jack Irwin, are the answer to a prayer I didn't know I was making." Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to love, honor, and cherish through whatever life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson kissed his bride with a tenderness that belied the passion building within him, aware of the congregation watching but unable to completely contain his joy. The celebration afterward at the town hall was lively despite the winter weather, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. Dr. Wilkins had given them a wedding gift beyond price, the deed to a small property adjoining Willow Creek, with a modest but well-built house that had once belonged to a friend of his who'd moved to California. "It needs some work," the doctor admitted as he handed them the papers, "but it's solid and close enough to town for Diana to continue helping in my practice while still being your own place." Diana embraced her uncle, tears of gratitude shining in her eyes. "It's perfect," she declared. "Absolutely perfect." Their first night as husband and wife was spent in that house, despite its need for repairs and the chill that lingered in rooms that had stood empty for months. They'd brought bedding and basic supplies, and Jackson built a roaring fire in the main fireplace that gradually warmed the bedroom above. When he carried Diana across the threshold, she laughed with delight, her arms around his neck and her eyes shining with love and anticipation. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," he said, setting her gently on her feet in what would become their bedroom. Diana reached up to frame his face with her hands. "Home," she repeated softly. "I've waited so long to feel that word in my bones, Jack, to know that home isn't just a place but a person." "We'll make this house a real home," he promised. "Together." "It already is," Diana whispered, drawing him down for a kiss that spoke of years of longing finally fulfilled. "Because you're here." Their coming together that night was both tender and passionate, a culmination of months of growing love and the promise of a future neither had dared hope for. In Diana's arms, Jackson found a healing more profound than any medicine could provide, the knowledge that he was truly loved, scars and all. And in Jackson, Diana found the partner she'd secretly longed for, a man of courage and conscience who saw her completely and loved what he saw. "I meant what I said that first day," she murmured later, her head pillowed on his chest as they lay entwined beneath the quilts. "You'll never be alone again, Jack, not ever." Jackson tightened his arms around her, overwhelmed by the gift of her love. "I believe you," he said simply. "For the first time in my life, I truly believe I'm home." Spring came early to Wyoming that year, as if nature itself approved of their union. Jackson and Diana worked side by side to transform their house into a home, planting a garden much like the one behind Dr. Wilkins' office, and adding personal touches that reflected both their tastes. Jackson continued working at Willow Creek, now as a partner rather than a hired hand after investing his savings in a small herd of his own. Diana divided her time between assisting her uncle in town and creating a warm, welcoming home that soon became a gathering place for friends and neighbors. News reached them in late April that Harlan Blackstone had been sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison, effectively ending any immediate threat to their safety. Though Jackson remained vigilant, he gradually relaxed into the rhythm of their life together, allowing himself to believe in the permanence of the happiness he'd found. In June, Diana shared news that completed their joy. She was expecting their first child, due to arrive shortly after Christmas. "Are you pleased?" she asked anxiously as she told him, her hands protective over her still flat stomach. Jackson gathered her close, his heart so full he could barely speak. "Please doesn't begin to describe it," he managed finally. "Diana, you've given me everything I never dared hope for. A home, your love, and now a family." Her smile was radiant through happy tears. "And you've given me the same, Jack, a partnership I never thought possible and a love that heals both of us." As summer turned to autumn and Diana's body changed with their growing child, Jackson often found himself watching her in wonder, marveling at the journey that had brought them together. From that blood-soaked day when he dragged himself to Dr. Wilkins' door, to this peaceful life they were building together, it seemed almost too perfect to be real. Yet it was real. As real as the kick of their unborn child beneath his hand when he touched Diana's rounded belly. As real as the house they'd made into a home, and the love that deepened between them with each passing day. Their son was born on a snowy night in January, with Diana's aunt and Dr. Wilkins attending the birth while Jackson paced anxiously outside the bedroom door. When the doctor finally emerged, his tired face split by a wide smile, Jackson felt his knees go weak with relief. "Congratulations, young man," Dr. Wilkins said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You have a healthy son and Diana is doing splendidly. She's asking for you." Jackson entered the bedroom to find Diana propped against pillows, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. When she looked up at him, her smile was more beautiful than anything he'd ever seen. "Come meet your son, Jack," she said softly. He approached the bed almost reverently, sitting carefully beside her and peering down at the tiny, perfect face of their child. The baby had a shock of dark hair like his own, and when he blinked sleepily up at his father, eyes that promised to be as green as Diana's. "He's perfect," Jackson whispered, overwhelmed by a love so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. "Absolutely perfect." "We thought we'd call him Elijah," Diana said, watching his face carefully. "After your friend, if that's all right with you." Tears filled Jackson's eyes as he nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "It's more than all right," he managed finally. Thank you." Diana reached up to touch his cheek, wiping away a tear with her thumb. "He'll grow up knowing he was named for a brave man who saved his father's life. Just as I'll make sure he knows how brave his own father is." Jackson covered her hand with his own. "I'm not brave, Diana. I just got lucky." "You survived," she corrected gently. "And then you had the courage to stop running and build a life. That's the bravest thing of all." Looking down at his wife and newborn son, Jackson finally understood what Diana had been trying to tell him all along. Survival wasn't just about making it through gunfights or battlefields. It was about finding the courage to live fully, to love without reservation, and to build something lasting from the broken pieces of the past. "I love you," he said simply, the words inadequate to express the depth of his feeling but all he had to offer. Diana's smile was knowing, as if she heard all the things he couldn't say. "I love you too, Jack, always." As young Elijah wrapped his tiny fingers around his father's calloused thumb, Jackson Irwin knew with absolute certainty that the nurse had been right that first day, when he'd arrived broken and alone on her doorstep. He would never be alone again. And in that knowledge, he had found healing more powerful than he'd ever thought possible. Years passed, and the Irwin family grew to include a daughter, Elizabeth, born 2 years after Elijah. Their home expanded as well, with Jackson adding rooms as their family and prosperity increased. By the time Elijah was 10 and Elizabeth 8, the Irwin Ranch was one of the most successful in the county, and Jackson had earned a reputation as a fair businessman and a loyal friend. Diana continued to assist her uncle when needed, though less frequently as their family grew. She found her true calling in teaching both their children and others in the area, eventually establishing a small school on their property that became known for its excellent education. On their 15th wedding anniversary, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jackson turned to his wife with a smile. "You ever think about that first day, when I showed up half dead on your doorstep?" Deanna laughed, the sound as musical to him now as it had been when he first heard it. Only every time I look at you and marvel at how far we've come. Jackson took her hand, still as smooth and capable as it had been when she'd first bandaged his wounds. You saved me in more ways than one that day. We saved each other, Diana corrected gently. That's what love does, Jack. It heals wounds we didn't even know we had. As the last light faded from the sky, they remained on the porch, hands clasped, surrounded by the life they'd built together, a testament to the healing power of love and the truth of a promise made long ago by a nurse to a wounded cowboy. Then you'll never be alone again.